What if the desert isn't empty at all? What if every grain of sand at Giza is a fragment of memory, of something once vast, luminous, and alive, now turned to silence beneath the weight of time? They say the sands shift and erase, but maybe they are not erasing, maybe they are guarding, and somewhere beneath that endless veil of ochre dust, a forgotten city sleeps, sealed by stone, hidden by those who remembered too much. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I'm creating here. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Beneath the pyramid's shadow, the desert is quiet. Too quiet. At dusk, when the heat fades and the stones breathe out the day's trapped fire, there's a sound. Soft, almost inaudible, like the earth exhaling. Some explorers swear they've heard it. A low hum beneath the plateau, a vibration that isn't wind. Others have measured it. Magnetic anomalies, radio echoes, or seismic murmurs too rhythmic to be coincidence. It might be nothing, they say, but nothing doesn't usually sing. Back in 1997, a team from Cairo University working with Japanese scientists used ground-penetrating radar on the Giza plateau. What they found has never been fully explained. Their data revealed vast cavities, not cracks or simple voids, but geometric chambers under both the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid. One beneath the Sphinx's right pore, another deeper still, aligned with the central axis of the pyramid itself. Officially, they were labeled natural features, but the maps showed right angles, corridors, repeating structures. Nature, it seems, had been remarkably precise that year. And then, silence. The results were never published in full. The Egyptian Antiquities Organization restricted further study, citing preservation concerns. The team disbanded and most of the raw data vanished into archives. For a while, whispers circulated that the chamber under the Sphinx was sealed deliberately, its entrance collapsed in antiquity. One engineer described, before he disappeared from the record, a hollow sound when tapping on the bedrock near the Sphinx's flank. Like knocking on a door no one was meant to open. But that door, if it exists, would be older than Egypt itself. The Giza Plateau is more than limestone and myth. Underneath it runs a labyrinth of natural caves and fault lines, many of which have been mapped, and then unmapped. The British Egyptologist Andrew Collins once described entering one of these caverns through a tomb at the western edge of the plateau. The passage descended into darkness, opening into a series of vaulted chambers filled with bat skeletons and ancient debris. When he traced the coordinates, he found the network stretched toward the Sphinx. Some believe this is part of a forgotten catacomb. Others say it's the upper tier of something deeper, a city swallowed by geological time. Ancient Egyptian texts spoke of a city of the gods, hidden below the land of the living, where the Neteru, the divine beings of Zep-Tepi, the first time, retreated when their reign ended. Later dynasties turned this into the myth of Duat, the underworld, the place where the sun god traveled each night through 12 gates before being reborn. But myths often begin as memories. What if Duat wasn't just spiritual metaphor but topography? A city beneath the desert, mapped in consciousness and in stone alike. It sounds impossible, and yet, every time someone digs a little too deep, history shifts slightly underfoot. Early explorers like Giovanni Belzoni and Colonel Weiss wrote of hearing hollow reverberations under certain parts of the plateau. In the 1800s, when sand was cleared from around the Sphinx's body for the first time in centuries, workers reported entering small tunnels beneath it. The most were quickly sealed again when collapses began. Local legends, still told among older Cairo families, speak of the Serpent Passage, a tunnel that winds beneath the Sphinx and leads to the Hole of Records, where Thoth himself inscribed the knowledge of the stars before the flood. Of course, such tales are easily dismissed. Egyptology as a discipline was founded on protecting boundaries between myth and measurement, between wonder and fact. Yet those boundaries blur when data itself is buried. In 2009, another radar survey was conducted quietly by an independent geophysical team, confirming again a network of cavities under the plateau. Their report used cautious language, subsurface anomalies of anthropogenic geometry. Translated from academic restraint, someone built something down there, and it's not part of the known tombs. But who could have built it, and when? The bedrock under Giza is millions of years old, but the structures above are roughly dated to 2500 BCE. If the tunnels are older, that means they predate the Old Kingdom, perhaps even the emergence of dynastic Egypt itself. Some geologists have proposed that portions of the plateau show signs of flooding, suggesting that earlier constructions could have existed when the Nile's course still ran closer to the pyramids, before desertification swallowed the region. The weathering on the Sphinx, as Dr. Robert Schoch argued, points to rainfall erosion, not wind, which would push its creation back to a wetter era, maybe 7,000, 9,000 years ago. If the Sphinx is that old, then whatever lies beneath might belong to a civilization that vanished long before Egypt began carving its own gods. A city buried under the pyramids, not as metaphor but as memory made stone. Imagine walking down into that silence. Ooh. The air would be heavy, the walls blackened with age, the architecture half eroded yet still mathematical, as though designed by minds fluent in geometry, but alien to our time. Perhaps the corridors hum faintly, not from machines, but from the earth itself resonating through the limestone. You could feel it in your bones, the echo of intention. Why would such a city be buried, and more importantly, why hidden? Was it destroyed by natural cataclysm, or sealed deliberately to protect something within? Myths from around the world speak of floods, fires, resets. The world before the world we know. Atlantis to the Greeks, Zep Tepi to the Egyptians, the Satyr Yuga to the Hindus. Different names, same undertone. Something came before, something that ended suddenly, and left behind guardians who built monuments as reminders. The pyramids, aligned to the stars, might not point upward, but downward, toward memory itself. And perhaps that is why the desert has remained silent for so long, because silence is a form of protection, because some knowledge is too heavy for the waking world. Under the moonlight, Giza doesn't just gleam, it listens. The wind passing between its stones sounds almost like breath, and the Sphinx, eroded and patient, seems to watch the horizon not for what's coming, but for what might return. So maybe the question isn't what lies beneath. Maybe the question is why it was hidden at all, and who decided that humanity wasn't ready to remember. There are corridors of history that never appear on any map. Pathways sealed not by stone, but by silence. Beneath the plateau, some claim these corridors still breathe faintly, their air trapped for thousands of years, carrying the scent of time before kings. But the question is not just what lies beneath Giza. It is who decided we should never look. In the early 1800s, explorers came to Egypt not as scholars, but as dreamers. Men like Giovanni Caviglia, Giovanni Belzoni, and Howard Weiss, names now etched into archaeological history, were drawn by whispers of secret chambers beneath the pyramids. Caviglia, one of the first to dig around the Sphinx, recorded in his journals strange hollows below the creature's pores. He noted a resonance when striking certain slabs, as though the ground were hollow underneath. He begged for permission to dig further but was denied. Officials said it was too dangerous. Perhaps it was. Years later, Colonel Weiss, whose methods were as violent as they were determined, used dynamite to break into the Great Pyramid's upper cavities, the so-called relieving chambers. There, he found quarry marks bearing the name of Pharaoh Khufu, an inscription that became the cornerstone of modern Egyptology. The pyramids, we were told, were tombs, mystery solved. But others quietly questioned the story. Some suspected those marks were added, perhaps by Weiss himself, to prove a conclusion he had already decided upon. What better way to secure fame than to discover evidence that solved the riddle forever? Beneath the triumph of discovery, there lingered the shadow of omission. Because while Weiss blasted his way upward, the real secrets were buried downward. The Great Pyramid's descending passage cuts deep into the bedrock, leading to what Egyptologists call the subterranean chamber. An unfinished cavity, they say, abandoned by the builders. But the room is unlike any other in Egyptian architecture. Its ceiling is rough-hewn, its floor uneven, and at its center lies a mysterious pit that continues into darkness. Some explorers dropped stones down it and waited, 5 seconds, 10, 15, before hearing them strike something far below. Yet the official depth, according to records, is only a few meters. The math doesn't align. Something down there absorbs sound or distance. William Flinders Petrie, one of Egypt's most meticulous archaeologists, measured every inch of the plateau in the late 19th century. His notebooks describe blocked conduits running off the main passage, filled with limestone dust and rubble. When he tried to clear them, his workers were stopped by officials. He never explained who gave the order, only that his excavation was not permitted to proceed. It was as if someone wanted the unfinished chamber to remain unfinished. There's an unease that seeps through old field notes and letters, subtle hints of discoveries quietly erased. In 1935, a story broke in the New York Times. New underground rooms found near Giza. It described a network of chambers beneath the plateau, discovered accidentally by workmen. The Egyptian Department of Antiquities confirmed the find, then swiftly denied it days later. The article vanished from public discussion. No follow-up, no retraction, just silence. Perhaps those chambers never existed, or perhaps they were found, and then hidden again. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described in awe a great labyrinth near Lake Moeris. 12 courtyards, 3,000 rooms, some above ground, some below. He claimed the underground holes were so vast that he was forbidden to enter them, but priests told him they contained the tombs of ancient kings and the sacred crocodiles. Scholars long assumed he exaggerated. But in 1888, Flinders Petrie discovered the remains of a vast complex at Hawara near the same lake. The foundations alone covered an area larger than a modern stadium. Beneath them, Petrie reported subterranean passages flooded with water. He believed this was the labyrinth Herodotus saw. But what if it wasn't the only one? Egypt's mythic geography has always doubled itself. What exists above has its mirror below. Temples mirrored the constellations. Tombs mirrored the heavens. So if a labyrinth existed at Hawara, could there not be another at Giza, the spiritual heart of the ancient world, a hidden counterpart meant for something other than burial? In 1944, Egyptian archaeologist Selim Hassan conducted one of the most extensive excavations near the Sphinx. His multi-volume reports, mostly untranslated, describe finding numerous tunnels leading beneath the monument. Some were ancient storage shafts. Others, he wrote cryptically, led nowhere yet suggested continuity. That phrase haunts the margins of his work, suggested continuity, as if the stone itself implied something more, but he was unwilling or unable to say it. By the 1960s, most of these entrances had been sealed, either by collapse or concrete. Tourists wandered above, unaware that below their feet lay corridors blocked not by age, but by decree, and over time, those who asked too many questions found doors quietly closing in other ways, careers stalled, research funding withdrawn, permits denied. The sands of Giza didn't just bury the past, they buried curiosity. Still, fragments slipped through the cracks. In 1998, independent researchers using infrared thermography detected heat signatures beneath the plateau, inconsistent with natural geology. One anomaly, near the Sphinx's left flank, suggested a void roughly 40 meters long. The pattern indicated masonry, not solid rock. Yet, once again, no excavation followed. The data remains locked behind university agreements. The public is told these anomalies are insignificant. But what is the threshold for significance when dealing with eternity? Imagine standing above that void at night as the stars rise precisely over the pyramid's apex. Beneath your feet, somewhere in the darkness, it might be a room, perfectly silent, perfectly preserved, dust motes unmoved for millennia. Perhaps the walls are inscribed not with hieroglyphs, but with something older, symbols we would no longer recognize. Maybe there are stairways descending farther still, into spaces where air itself feels ancient, heavy with forgotten breath, and perhaps, just perhaps, those early explorers who claimed to hear hollow sounds under the plateau weren't imagining it at all. Perhaps the ground was whispering back, warning that history has layers we're not ready to peel away. What if the tombs of kings were only the visible tips of something vaster? A city of the dead that was never meant to be entered, because it was never truly dead. What if Giza was not built over that city, but for it, as a monument of memory, a marker above the sealed world below? Each discovery seems to lead closer to that possibility, only to vanish again into bureaucracy, denial, or sandstorms that conveniently reclaim the evidence. But history has a strange rhythm, one that always returns to its buried pulse. The deeper we dig, the more we realize that knowledge itself behaves like the desert. It buries what it cannot yet bear to reveal. Perhaps that's why the chambers remain sealed, not because of superstition or politics, but because the world above isn't ready to hear what the silence beneath is still trying to say. And if there truly is a door under the Sphinx, a forgotten entrance carved into an age before Egypt had a name, then it is not waiting to be opened, it is waiting to be remembered. Somewhere between myth and memory, there lies a story about a labyrinth, a place so vast that even its ruins could humble an empire. Herodotus, writing nearly 25 centuries ago, swore that he saw it with his own eyes. He called it a wonder surpassing even the pyramids. 12 courtyards, 3,000 rooms, and beneath them, endless halls that only the priests were allowed to enter. He said the labyrinth contained the tombs of kings and sacred crocodiles, but he admitted something else too, that what lay below was so astonishing he could hardly describe it. For centuries, scholars have dismissed this as exaggeration. But what if he wasn't mistaken? What if the labyrinth still exists, not in ruins, but in concealment, buried beneath the sands of Giza itself? Herodotus located his labyrinth near Lake Moeris, in the Fayum region, some 90 kilometers south of Cairo. Later historians such as Strabo and Diodorus Siculus described it too, adding details that made it seem less like fantasy and more like a memory retold. In 1888, archaeologist Flinders Petrie found what he believed to be the labyrinth's remains at Hawara. Foundations of colossal scale, covered in debris, surrounded by flooded tunnels. Yet what he uncovered was only the surface, the upper story. Beneath it, he found vast chambers filled with water. He concluded the underground portion had collapsed or was intentionally sealed. But there were rumors even then that the real labyrinth extended far beyond Hawara, linking to a network of tunnels that stretched toward Giza. This idea was quietly mocked, even suppressed. Egyptology at the time was eager to bring order to chaos, to categorize, to assign dynasties, to place every stone neatly into the chronology of pharaohs. But the labyrinth, if real, was too anomalous. It belonged to a prehistory that didn't fit the timeline. Petrie noted something curious, though: the precision of the architecture. Even the foundation stones seemed to align with stellar bearings, just like the pyramids. And when he measured their orientation, he found they pointed north, toward Giza. Perhaps coincidence, or perhaps design. What if Herodotus' labyrinth wasn't a single site, but a system, one whose heart lies deeper under the plateau? Ancient Egypt was a civilization obsessed with symmetry. The sky mirrored the earth, The upper mirrored the lower. Temples were reflections of the heavens, and the duat, the underworld, was considered a mirror of the world above. To them, architecture was never merely physical, it was metaphysical, a map of creation. So if there was a labyrinth for the dead, there must also have been one for the living. Some fragments of papyrus hint at this. The so-called Book of the Hidden Chamber, or Amduat, describes a journey through 12 divisions of the night. 12 gates the sun god passes through before dawn. Each section is guarded by walls, serpents, and rivers of fire. Many dismiss it as allegory, but some researchers have noted uncanny parallels between the Amduat's layout and the ground plan of Giza itself. Could it be that the labyrinth was both a physical and symbolic construct, an underworld mapped in stone beneath the city of the gods? In the 20th century, French explorer Paul Brunton claimed to have been led into a subterranean passage under Giza by an Egyptian initiate. He described descending narrow corridors lined with smooth stone, passing chambers that glowed faintly from hidden sources of light. The account reads like a dream, but Brunton's writings predate many later discoveries, including radar confirmations of underground anomalies. He called it the Temple of Initiation, a place where souls were tested in darkness before being reborn. He never published its location. He said simply, "The door opens only to those who are called." Modern science has its own way of hearing such whispers. In the early 2000s, satellite-based infrared imaging revealed linear patterns beneath Giza that correspond to non-geological structures, straight lines, rectangular voids, and what appear to be connecting corridors. These anomalies lie beneath the existing temple foundations and extend for hundreds of meters. Some resemble the grid of a buried city, others, a labyrinth. Yet official reports remain silent. No excavations, no disclosures, only rumors that international teams requested access and were refused. Why would such a discovery be ignored? Perhaps because it would rewrite too much. The labyrinth, if proven to exist beneath Giza, would predate the pyramids themselves. Its construction would require knowledge of stone cutting, geometry, and seismic alignment, far beyond what conventional timelines allow. It would suggest that Egypt inherited something, a system, a memory, or even the entire architecture of initiation from a civilization that came before the Nile kingdoms. To admit that would be to fracture the narrative of human progress, the comforting idea that history is linear, ascending neatly from primitive to advanced. But what if it is cyclical instead? What if the pyramids were not the beginning of Egyptian genius, but its echo? Herodotus' words take on a different resonance then. When he wrote of priests who forbade him from entering the lower halls, maybe they weren't hiding tombs, maybe they were protecting knowledge, or technology, that was already ancient in their time. Legends from various traditions speak of chambers of wisdom hidden after a great flood, sealed until humanity was ready again. Thoth, the Egyptian god of knowledge, was said to have written the books of eternity and buried them in a secret chamber beneath the Sphinx. It's tempting to dismiss such myths, yet every culture seems to preserve the same motif: a lost archive buried beneath the surface of the world. Could the labyrinth be that archive? Archaeologists like Zahi Hawass have long denied any undisclosed chambers under Giza, yet in 2010, a televised documentary inadvertently revealed geophysical data confirming anomalies under the causeway between the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. The footage was quickly pulled from circulation, citing scientific inaccuracies, but screenshots remained online, grids of glowing rectangles unmistakably architectural. When pressed, Hawass said only, "There are no secrets in Egypt." The irony did not go unnoticed. Perhaps the labyrinth is not meant to be found because it never truly disappeared. It exists in plain sight, disguised as myth. Every ancient temple that mirrors the stars, every chamber that resonates with hidden frequency, they are fragments of its blueprint. The true labyrinth may not even be a place, but a pattern, an encoded geometry beneath the sand, waiting for the right resonance to awaken it. Imagine standing at the center of that design. The walls hum faintly, tuned to the same frequencies as the king's chamber above. The air feels dense, charged, as though thought itself has weight. The ancients may have built such places to alter consciousness, to teach not through words but through vibration. A labyrinth is, after all, a journey inward. Perhaps those underground holes were not prisons of stone but instruments of initiation, portals between states of being. And so, the question remains, what did Herodotus truly see? Did he stumble upon a relic of prehistory? Or was he permitted only a glimpse, the upper rooms of a structure whose heart still beats beneath the sand? Every myth hides a memory, every denial hides a doorway, and every labyrinth, no matter how deep, is built around a center, the one place no one is allowed to reach. If the pyramids are the lungs of Giza, then the Sphinx is its mouth, silent, eroded, and forever watching. Its gaze has outlasted empires, sandstorms, and centuries of questions that have never received answers. Yet, for all the attention it commands, there remains one thing no one can explain with certainty: what lies beneath it. For thousands of years, travelers have written that there are tunnels under the Sphinx, chambers that echo faintly when the wind passes over the plateau. The ancient Arabs called it Abu al-Hol, the father of terror. The Greeks thought it was older than time itself. And when the first explorers began to dig at its feet, they found not only stone, but sound. The Sphinx is carved directly out of the bedrock, not built like the pyramids. Its body shows layers of limestone eroded unevenly, and those layers tell a story older than dynasties. The upper portion, weathered by wind, is hard and pale, but the lower body is deeply pitted, not by sand but by water. That simple fact changed everything. In 1991, a geologist, Robert Schoch, presented his controversial findings that the weathering on the Sphinx could only have been caused by prolonged heavy rainfall, not the desert climate of the last 5,000 years. His conclusion was devastating for the conventional timeline. The Sphinx must have been carved between 7,000 and 9,000 BCE, during a time when the Giza Plateau was still fertile and green. Egyptologists dismissed him immediately, but the stone didn't. It still whispers the same story. If the Sphinx is older than the civilization that built the pyramids, then who carved it? And why did they bury it up to its neck in sand, as if deliberately hiding what it guards? The first excavation in modern times, led by Caviglia in 1817, uncovered the front pores for the first time in centuries. He found a small cavity between them, which some believed led to a deeper shaft. Later, Émile Barrès, a French engineer working for the Egyptian Antiquities Service in the 1920s, claimed to have discovered multiple tunnels, one running down along the Sphinx's spine, another descending beneath the monument. He sealed them again after partial exploration, noting in his reports that further digging could disturb the balance of the monument. But the wording was strange, almost ritualistic, as if he feared disturbing something else entirely. In 1997, a Japanese radar survey confirmed the presence of rectangular voids beneath the Sphinx's pores and along its north flank. The data suggested chambers, not random geological hollows, but engineered spaces. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities dismissed the findings, calling them unverified anomalies. But anomalies have a way of growing louder the longer they're ignored. In 2006, seismic tomography again detected cavities under the same region. The pattern was unmistakable, a hollow extending along an east-west axis directly beneath the monument's heart. Legends call this place the Hall of Records, the hidden library of Thoth, where the wisdom of pre-dynastic ages was sealed before the world changed. Some dismiss this as the product of mystics like Edgar Cayce, who prophesied in the early 20th century that such a chamber would be found before the end of the century. But the myth of a buried archive predates Cayce by millennia. The ancient Egyptians themselves spoke of Shat and Hisset, the hidden chamber of the gods. In texts from the Edfu temple, it is described as a repository of sacred writings buried in the Isle of Flames, a poetic name scholars have sometimes linked to Giza. What if that chamber is real, not as fantasy, but as archaeology waiting to surface? The Sphinx faces east, directly toward the rising sun of the spring equinox. It watches the rebirth of light year after year in perfect alignment. Yet its face does not match its body. The head is disproportionately small, suggesting it was recarved at some point, perhaps to resemble a later ruler. This alteration implies the body itself predates the face, and therefore predates the civilization that altered it. Beneath the surface of the statue, seismic readings indicate inconsistencies in density, as if cavities or tunnels snake through the bedrock. And though the official explanation remains silence, a few quiet voices have admitted that sealed doors exist beneath the pores, small stone slabs blocking deeper shafts. These are the sealed entrances mentioned in French reports from the 1930s, now lost to time. Imagine descending through one of them. The temperature would drop, the air thick with the scent of limestone and old water. Your torchlight would reflect against smooth walls, carved not with hieroglyphs but with geometric symbols, lines, arcs, intersecting circles, the language of design, not words. Some surfaces would hum faintly, as if resonating with frequencies older than speech itself. And deeper still, perhaps, a chamber shaped like the horizon, a place where light could be trapped and reflected, amplifying sound in perfect pitch. Some physicists who studied the pyramid's inner acoustics found that the chambers resonate at specific frequencies, around 440 Hz, the same as the musical note A, which modern instruments are tuned to. Others suggest it's not coincidence. If sound was sacred to the ancients, then these monuments were not tombs but resonators, instruments designed to manipulate vibration, perhaps even consciousness. Could the Sphinx, too, have been a part of that orchestra? The mouth that once sang the harmony of the earth itself. The erosion, the tunnels, the anomalies, they all point to one conclusion that official history cannot bear to acknowledge. The Sphinx is not just older than Egypt. It may be the last surviving sentinel of a forgotten age. Every survey that finds another cavity, every anomaly that's quietly filed away, strengthens the possibility that beneath this monument lies something extraordinary. Not gold, not mummies, but memory itself, preserved in stone and silence. And yet, access remains forbidden. Egyptologists argue it's to protect the integrity of the monument, and perhaps they're right. But it's strange, isn't it? How the greatest discoveries always seem to wait behind locked doors and sealed reports. The desert, too, keeps its promises. It doesn't reveal its secrets easily. The sands that once swallowed the Sphinx nearly to its chin will one day bury it again. The monument endures not because it is eternal, but because it remembers how to disappear. At night, under the cold light of the moon, its shadow stretches across the plateau like a tongue of darkness, as though the earth itself were trying to speak through it. You can almost feel the hum under your feet, the breath of stone, the slow rhythm of something sleeping deep below. And perhaps the Sphinx isn't watching the stars at all. Perhaps it's listening to the sound of doors unlocking, for the moment when memory begins to rise again through the sand. Beneath the starlit plateau, the pyramids stand like frozen thunder, colossal, geometric, silent. Every surface seems deliberate, every angle precise beyond the reach of coincidence. Yet for centuries we have repeated the same story. They were tombs, grand, solemn, majestic, but tombs nonetheless. It's the version printed in textbooks, engraved in plaques, repeated by guides who speak in rehearsed wonder. But as night falls and the air cools around their perfect edges, one begins to sense something that does not fit. The pyramids feel less like places of death and more like instruments of resonance, not mausoleums, but machines. There's a strange irony in calling the Great Pyramid a tomb when no body has ever been found inside. No inscriptions, no funerary markings, no sarcophagus bearing the name of Khufu. Only a plain granite box in the king's chamber, empty and resonant like the soundboard of a vast instrument. Egyptologists argue that the body was stolen, or that grave robbers desecrated the site long ago. But if so, why were no traces left behind? No fragments, no soot, no disruption to the perfect alignment of the inner passages. The pyramid is too orderly for theft, too exact for chaos. When British surveyors entered in the 19th century, they noticed something odd: the sound. When struck, the granite box in the king's chamber emitted a deep tone that lingered in the air. The walls, the floor, the ceiling all responded to certain frequencies. In the 1960s, an acoustic engineer named Paul Horn recorded the interior vibrations. He found that each chamber resonated at a different frequency, and together they formed a harmonic scale, as though the structure itself were tuned. Later studies by physicist Tom Danley revealed that the pyramid amplifies low-frequency sound waves, particularly between 16 and 32 Hz, a range known to affect the human brain. Could it be that the pyramid wasn't designed to house a dead king, but to awaken something living? When Nikola Tesla was experimenting with resonance and wireless energy at the turn of the 20th century, he remarked that the Earth itself is a conductor, resonating like a bell. The Great Pyramid, with its limestone casing, granite chambers, and internal shafts, mirrors the very proportions of a resonant cavity. Some modern researchers have proposed that it functioned as a type of energy transducer, capturing electromagnetic charge from the Earth's natural vibrations, the Schumann resonance, and channeling it upward through its structure. The shafts, perfectly aligned with specific stars, could have acted as both celestial markers and energetic conduits. It sounds like science fiction, but the evidence lingers in geometry. The pyramid's height is to its base, as the radius of a circle is to its circumference, a mathematical constant of pi. Its sides align almost perfectly to the cardinal directions. The ratio between its height and base also encodes the golden mean, phi, a proportion found in living organisms, galaxies, and sound harmonics. Such precision implies intention beyond mere architecture. To carve stone on this scale, with accuracy to fractions of a degree for the sole purpose of burial, it seems almost cruelly inefficient, unless the builders were trying to do something else. Some physicists who have studied the internal structure suggest that the Great Pyramid could act as a massive harmonic resonator. When sound or seismic waves pass through the Earth, the pyramid's internal cavities vibrate sympathetically. The king's chamber amplifies these frequencies, producing standing waves that linger in the stone. The sarcophagus-like box at its center might not be a coffin at all, but a tuning core, the focus of resonance. Ancient inscriptions elsewhere in Egypt call the pharaohs sons of the sun and masters of vibration. Perhaps these titles were not poetic. Perhaps initiation in these chambers involved sound, frequency, and altered states of awareness, a ritual to harmonize the human body with the vibration of the cosmos. Other pyramids around the world, in Mexico, Peru, and even China, show similar acoustic behavior. In the temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, clapping at the base produces a chirping echo identical to the call of the sacred Quetzal bird. In the Mayan language, Quetzal symbolized the voice of the gods. At Saqqara in Egypt, the step pyramid's subterranean galleries are designed to magnify chant and percussion. These parallels hint at a shared understanding among ancient cultures that sound, not stone, was the foundation of creation. So why do we insist on calling them tombs? Maybe because to do otherwise would demand that we rewrite too much. The tomb theory was formalized in the 19th century, when Egyptology sought simple explanations for complex mysteries. Scholars needed closure. They needed the pyramids to belong to history, not to something that defied it. And so, they assigned them to kings, the only figures grand enough to justify such monuments. Yet even this fails under scrutiny. The smaller pyramids of later dynasties bear inscriptions, decorations, and funerary goods, all the things the Great Pyramid lacks. The farther one travels back in time, the more perfect and silent the structures become. Civilization, it seems, began with mastery and declined into imitation. Within the Great Pyramid there is a passage known as the Ascending Corridor, a narrow, steep shaft that leads upward into darkness. Standing there, you can feel the vibration of your own pulse echoing against the walls. Every sound is magnified, transformed. When explorers first entered the king's chamber, they reported dizziness, euphoria, even hallucinations. Was this psychological or intentional? If the pyramid was designed to manipulate frequency, they could influence human perception. Ancient initiates may have entered not to die, but to transcend, to pass symbolically from matter to light. Some legends describe the pharaoh not as ruler, but as the one who becomes the star. In this reading, the pyramid is not a tomb but a launch, a vibrational portal guiding consciousness back to its celestial origin. The air shafts of the Great Pyramid align precisely with Orion's belt and Sirius, the same stars associated with Osiris and Isis, the divine pair who governed rebirth. Every shaft, every angle, every proportion is a map of transformation. If that's true, then what lies beneath the pyramids, the tunnels, the hidden chambers, may be the roots of an ancient energy system, a network that connected these monuments to natural forces deep within the earth. Some researchers have compared it to the acupuncture points of a planetary body, places where energy flows could be focused, regulated, or awakened. The pyramids might have been the surface markers of a vast technological and spiritual infrastructure. The silence inside them is deceptive. It isn't empty, it's tuned. When you stand at the heart of the king's chamber and whisper, the walls seem to whisper back. The sound folds upon itself, traveling in endless loops. It's not hard to imagine that once those frequencies were harnessed for something profound, something that bridged the human and the divine. And maybe that's why the pyramids were sealed. Maybe their purpose was never to hold the dead, but to awaken the living. Maybe their architects understood that to preserve knowledge, one must carve it into vibration itself, into the geometry of stone and the resonance of silence. What if every echo inside those corridors isn't merely sound, but memory, waiting to be heard again? There are moments in history when silence feels heavier than stone. Around Giza, that silence deepens the closer you listen. Scholars have mapped every visible chamber, measured every inch of limestone, and catalogued every block that forms the pyramid's facades. Yet the true enigma of Egypt is not what stands above the sand, but what lies beneath it. Beneath the Sphinx, beneath the plateau, perhaps beneath the very idea of history itself, there is said to be a place of preservation, a vault of knowledge sealed before the flood, before Egypt had a name. The ancients called it the House of Thoth. Later mystics renamed it the Hall of Records. Others, in whispers, have called it the Black Archives. Legends of such an archive appear across civilizations. In Hermetic tradition, Thoth, or Hermes Trismegistus, was the keeper of sacred knowledge, the one who inscribed the laws of the universe on emerald tablets and hid them so that only the worthy could rediscover them. The Edfu temple texts speak of primeval writings buried by divine builders after the Isle of Flames was destroyed. The texts never specify where, but their descriptions of the landscape, a plateau west of the Nile guarded by a lion-faced sentinel, leave little room for doubt. If the Hall of Records exists, it sleeps beneath Giza. For decades, mainstream Egyptology dismissed these stories as spiritual metaphor. But every few years, evidence surfaces, a seismic anomaly, an ancient reference, an unacknowledged excavation, and the myth breathes again. In 1925, the Egyptian scholar Selim Hassan wrote of finding subterranean vaults of unusual size beneath the Sphinx enclosure. He believed they were part of a larger complex yet to be excavated. His reports were later edited before publication. In the original manuscript preserved in Cairo's archives, there is a line written in haste, later crossed out. The lower chamber continues beyond the western wall, possibly man-made. No further mention appears in his published work. 50 years later, in 1978, a team from Stanford Research Institute conducted a ground-penetrating radar survey near the Sphinx. Their data showed multiple cavities beneath the monument, including a large rectangular chamber directly under its four pores. The results were deemed inconclusive and quietly shelved. Then, in 1991, another scan by a Japanese team confirmed similar anomalies. Again, no excavation followed. Each time someone glimpses the threshold, the gate closes. Those who have studied the myth of the Hall of Records say it was created to outlast time. A library not of papyrus or clay, but of vibration and geometry. The ancients knew that stone could store frequency. They believed that memory itself could be encoded in matter, that certain shapes could trap knowledge the way amber traps light. If that sounds impossible, consider that modern physicists speak of the acoustic memory of crystals, the way quartz stores information in vibration. The ancients might have known this intuitively. Their archives could be structures that preserve not books, but resonance. The knowledge wouldn't be read, it would be heard. In that sense, the pyramids, the temples, even the Sphinx might be part of a distributed library, each monument a page in a text written in frequency. The Black Archives would be the index, the chamber that harmonizes them all, buried deep enough to survive cataclysm. Egyptian priests often spoke of houses of life, places where sacred writings and formulas of rebirth were kept. Some were physical libraries, but others were symbolic, representing levels of consciousness. The deeper one descended, the closer one came to divine understanding. If so, the Hall of Records could exist both in stone and in spirit, a blueprint mirrored in the human mind. Yet, something about the secrecy surrounding Giza suggests a more tangible mystery. There are records of sealed shafts that modern archaeologists have never reopened. One of these, discovered by a French expedition in 1937 near the Sphinx's tail, was said to descend vertically for 30 meters before ending at a stone door. It was filled with water and declared inaccessible. The logs of that dig vanished from the Antiquities archives in the 1950s. Only fragments survive in private collections, sketches of a circular chamber and strange markings resembling constellations. Then came the strange case of Dr. Khalil Messiha, an Egyptian physician and amateur archaeologist. In the 1960s, while studying aerial photographs, he identified what appeared to be buried structures west of the Sphinx, patterns of right angles beneath the dunes. He proposed that they could be the remains of ancient temples or archives. His theory was dismissed, yet a later infrared survey conducted by NASA in 2011 revealed matching anomalies, rectangular formations beneath the sand positioned in alignment with the pyramid's layout. Officially, these are described as natural features. Unofficially, they form a grid. Some researchers argue that these buried holes may connect to older myths of Atlantis, that Egypt inherited not only its gods but its memory from a civilization lost to flood and fire. Edgar Cayce, the American clairvoyant, predicted that the Hall of Records would be discovered between the pores of the Sphinx before the end of the 20th century, revealing the truth about humanity's forgotten past. His prophecy failed, or perhaps was fulfilled quietly, away from public eyes. If such a discovery had been made, would we even be told? Or would it join the long chain of denials and disappearances that have followed every anomaly at Giza? There's a darker possibility. Perhaps the Hall of Records was never meant to be opened. Ancient traditions warn that forbidden knowledge can consume those who seek it. The emerald tablets themselves, if they ever existed, were said to be inscribed with words that could alter reality. In some versions, Thoth writes, "Guard you well the secrets I leave, seek them not until the sons of men are ready." Maybe that readiness was not intellectual but moral, an evolution of consciousness rather than technology. Perhaps humanity's curiosity is still too impatient for what the stones remember, and yet something within us keeps searching. We dig, we scan, we listen to the earth's whispers beneath the wind. Every discovery denied becomes another proof that something worth denying exists. The Sphinx watches through the centuries, its lips cracked by sun and time, as if trying not to speak. The silence is deliberate, a lock, not an absence. If the black archives exist, their entrance might not be physical at all. It might require a frequency, a sound, a resonance that reawakens the stone itself. The ancients believed that sound could move matter, that the word of creation, or logos, shaped the universe. Perhaps the key to the whole of records is not in digging, but in remembering the right tone. One day the desert will shift again. Dunes will move like waves, and something long buried will glint under the sun. Whether it will be opened, or whether it will simply sink again into the deep sleep of sand, no one can say. But if you stand before the Sphinx at dawn, when the first light brushes its face, you might sense it, that faint vibration rising from below, as if the earth itself is whispering through stone. The records were never lost, only waiting. The desert was never meant to be dry. Once, long before sand replaced the Nile's green pulse, the plateau of Giza was alive with water. The stone tells his story quietly, through its patterns, through the way erosion curves like ancient tide lines against the bedrock. Every geologist knows that water leaves memory in rock. It carves, it hums, it whispers of movement. Beneath Giza, that whisper continues, not as myth, but as flow. For decades, instruments have detected the sound of water moving under the plateau. Some believe it is nothing more than groundwater. Others, more patient, suspect it is the remnant of an ancient system, one the pyramids themselves were built to harness. In 2012, geophysicist Abbas Mohammed conducted a series of hydrological studies beneath the Giza Plateau. Using resistivity mapping, his team detected subterranean aquifers stretching for kilometers beneath the pyramids, connected by narrow channels of limestone that behave like conduits. To his surprise, the data revealed cavities at key geometric alignments under each major pyramid, as if the structures had been positioned deliberately over points of underground flow. He proposed that these aquifers once formed part of a vast water table, fed by an ancient branch of the Nile that ran close to the plateau. The river's shift eastward over thousands of years left behind this buried network. But then came a deeper question. Were the pyramids simply built near water, or built because of it? Some researchers, drawing on acoustic and electrical experiments, have argued that the Great Pyramid's design could have interacted with the movement of water beneath it. As the underground streams flowed through limestone cavities, they generated piezoelectric charge, small but measurable, that could be conducted through the pyramid's granite core. Granite, rich in quartz, reacts to pressure and vibration by releasing electrons. In effect, the monument could have served as a natural power amplifier, harvesting energy from the Earth's own movement. This isn't speculation born from fantasy. Similar principles are used in modern hydroelectric sensors. The ancients may have discovered resonance between water, stone, and geometry long before science named it. If true, then the pyramids might represent not funerary monuments, but an ancient form of energy architecture, designed to stabilize, tune, or even communicate with the Earth's magnetic field. That idea, dismissed for decades, has quietly regained attention since satellite scans began revealing traces of old water channels beneath the desert. These channels, some running directly below the Great Pyramid, are no longer active rivers but fossilized streams. Yet seismic sensors still record faint vibrations, the echo of trapped water shifting through porous limestone. The Earth breathes beneath Giza, and the pyramids respond like tuning forks. The connection between water and sacred power is older than Egypt itself. Across the world, the first civilizations built their temples near underground streams or springs. Delphi in Greece, built upon the vaporous waters of Gaia. Teotihuacan, aligned with subterranean caves where rivers once flowed. Angkor Wat, surrounded by engineered moats reflecting the heavens. The Egyptians themselves wrote of the waters of life beneath the earth, calling them the Nun, the primordial ocean from which creation emerged. The temples and pyramids were seen as symbolic islands rising from that chaos. But perhaps they weren't symbolic at all. Perhaps they were literal machines built to converse with that water, to draw its hidden frequencies upward into the world of light. In 1999, divers exploring a well near the Temple of Isis, south of the Great Pyramid, reported hearing a deep rhythmic vibration echoing from the rock. The sound was steady, pulsing, as if something beneath the plateau was resonating. When measured, the frequency matched the oscillations of subterranean flow detected elsewhere in the region. The vibration seemed to concentrate beneath the pyramid complex. It was as if the entire plateau was singing, one of them recalled. That description might be poetic or observational. The human ear, after all, can sense only a narrow range of the Earth's music. Below 20 Hz, vibration becomes inaudible, but not inactive. Ancient Egyptian texts speak of the sound of the sun within the earth, a phrase modern translators often dismiss as metaphor. Yet when the sun heats the surface during the day, the groundwater expands. At night, as the air cools, it contracts. The resulting pressure cycle generates low-frequency vibration through the rock, a literal sound of the sun resonating below the plateau. The ancients may have experienced this not as noise, but as a presence, a divine hum connecting the heavens and the underworld. Some have even suggested that the causeways connecting the pyramids were not ceremonial roads, but conduits for managing the subterranean flow. They align with subtle gradients of the terrain, channeling seasonal floodwaters from the plateau's higher ground toward the Nile. In doing so, they may have balanced the water table, preventing destabilization beneath the monuments. Hydraulic control disguised as ritual processional paths, function disguised as faith. This vision of Giza, as a hydrological and energetic system, changes everything. The pyramids become more than symbols of eternity. They become instruments of equilibrium. It might explain why later dynasties could never replicate them. The precise geological conditions, the resonance of limestone, the proximity of flowing water, the harmony of structure and earth, existed only here, only once. If such an understanding truly guided the builders, then perhaps the whole of records beneath the Sphinx is not a library of scrolls, but of mechanisms, cavities filled with ancient devices of stone and metal, designed to measure or amplify natural forces. If water still moves below, even faintly, it may still be powering something, not in the mechanical sense, but in the energetic one. The earth hums, and above it, the monuments hum in return. The ancients call this balance mat, the principle of cosmic order. Standing on the plateau today, it's difficult to imagine that this desolation was once fertile, but radar imagery shows traces of riverbeds beneath the desert extending toward the Fayum oasis, the very region where Herodotus described his labyrinth. Some believe those riverbeds once connected all the major monuments, forming a watery mirror of the heavens, each pyramid an island, each temple a node in a network. Perhaps the lost city buried beneath the sands, if it exists, was built around these flows, using them as arteries of life and communication. Water remembers, even when it dries. Its patterns remain etched in the strata, invisible to the naked eye, but clear to instruments. The pyramids were not built in defiance of nature, but in conversation with it. They do not stand on the earth, they rise from it, pulsing with the rhythm of buried currents. At night, when the air cools and silence thickens, the ground beneath Giza still vibrates, a soft tremor, almost imperceptible, like a breath drawn deep beneath the sand. Whether it is the echo of ancient water or something else, no one can say. But the resonance feels alive. Maybe that's what the ancients meant when they said the gods slept beneath the earth. Not beings of flesh and power, but energies, the elemental consciousness of the planet itself. And perhaps the pyramids were not built to worship them, but to keep them dreaming in harmony until the world was ready to awaken once more. If the pyramids were machines, then geometry was their power source. Not fuel, not fire, but proportion. The invisible language that binds matter to meaning. Standing before them, it's easy to forget that every angle, every alignment, every ratio is not merely aesthetic, but intentional. The Great Pyramid, for example, does not simply face north. It aligns with true north to within 3/60ths of a degree. A precision unmatched by modern structures until the invention of lasers. The question that lingers like an echo in the limestone is not how the builders achieved this, but why. What did such precision serve, if not a function that transcended architecture? From above, the Giza Plateau forms a perfect triangle, the three main pyramids positioned not randomly, but as a reflection of Orion's belt. This pattern, first proposed by Robert Bauval in the 1980s, extends far beyond mere coincidence. The spacing between the pyramids mirrors the apparent distances between the three stars, Mintaka, Al-Nilam, and Al-Nitak, adjusted for precession, as they would have appeared around 2500 BCE, long before the official timeline of Egyptian civilization. The alignment with Orion, associated with Osiris, god of resurrection, suggests a cosmic map, the heavens engraved into the earth. But the geometry extends even deeper, hinting at a system older than Egypt itself. Consider this. The latitude of the Great Pyramid is 29.97 kn, almost identical to the speed of light in meters per second, 299,792 kilometers per second. Coincidence, perhaps, yet the recurrence of this precision across multiple ratios between height, base, and perimeter begins to feel less accidental. The pyramid encodes P, F, and even the ratio between the Earth's radius and circumference. It behaves not as a tomb, but as a mathematical model of the planet, a scaled-down harmonization of Earth and cosmos. And what if the same pattern lies beneath? In 2011, infrared satellite imaging revealed grid-like anomalies buried beneath the sand around the Giza Plateau. Hundreds of rectangular outlines, roads, and what appeared to be building foundations extending for kilometers. Official statements described them as potential archaeological sites, yet no follow-up excavations were permitted. The images, quietly archived by NASA's infrared team, suggest that Giza may once have been surrounded by a structured settlement. Not a necropolis, but a city, geometrically aligned with the pyramids above. The pattern resembles a mandala, a sacred diagram of symmetry and balance. Could this be the underground city the ancients spoke of? Not mythic, but mathematical? The Egyptians were not alone in their obsession with geometry. Across continents, ancient builders encoded the same ratios: the golden mean, the harmonic triangle, the 3-4-5 Pythagorean rule, long before those formulas were written down. The temples of Angkor align with celestial meridians. The megaliths of Stonehenge and Karnak mark solstitial points. The pyramids of Teotihuacan replicate the same angular relationships as those of Giza. It's as if ancient civilizations shared a common blueprint, one that transcended culture, geography, and even time. Was it coincidence or communication? Perhaps geometry was their language, the one medium that could survive cataclysm, censorship, and decay. Numbers cannot erode, ratios do not age. A civilization that wished to preserve its knowledge indefinitely would carve it into form, not text. Every dimension of the Great Pyramid seems to whisper a constant, a cosmic truth about scale and resonance. The height multiplied by 43,200 equals the Earth's polar radius. The perimeter multiplied by the same constant equals the planet's equatorial circumference. Such precision implies knowledge of global measurements, knowledge that official history insists did not exist until thousands of years later. If geometry was a code, then perhaps the key lies not in what's visible, but in what's hidden, in the spaces beneath the ground. When radar surveys mapped the plateau in the late 1990s, researchers noticed that the voids beneath the pyramids followed the same ratios as the structures above. The cavities were not random. Their depth, width, and alignment seemed mathematically tuned, like the bass frequencies beneath a symphony. What if those underground chambers were part of the same harmonic design, functioning as the lower octave of the geometry above? The ancients believed that harmony between heaven and earth was not metaphorical but literal, that sacred architecture could stabilize cosmic energy. The temple, in their worldview, was a resonance device aligning the terrestrial with the celestial. To build in perfect proportion was to participate in the act of creation. Perhaps the builders of Giza sought not to imitate the stars but to anchor them, to tether the heavens to earth through mathematics. It's strange to think that geometry could have emotion. Yet when you stand before those pyramids at dusk, something stirs that isn't intellectual. The air seems heavier, the silence charged. It's as though the mind begins to sense the ratios without needing to calculate them, the way one feels harmony in music before understanding notes. The ancient Greeks called this sympatheia, the resonance of all things connected by proportion. Egypt may have been its birthplace. There are stories, unconfirmed but persistent, that beneath the plateau lies a network of perfectly carved corridors forming an enormous geometric pattern. Some call it the lattice, others the map. According to these whispers, it connects the three pyramids, the Sphinx, and several now buried temples into a single integrated design. Its proportions mirror not only Orion's belt, but also the angle of the Earth's axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. To know this tilt is to know the rhythm of the seasons, the balance of light and darkness, the geometry of time itself. If this lattice truly exists, then Giza was not simply a royal necropolis but a cosmic instrument, a structure designed to calibrate human consciousness to planetary and celestial cycles. The builders were not primitive engineers but mathematicians of metaphysics, encoding the universe into stone. The city that may lie beneath, if it ever reveals itself, would be the foundation of this geometry, the generator, the 0 point where proportion began. Of course, mainstream science will not entertain such possibilities, yet every attempt to reduce Giza to simple architecture falters against its precision. Even with modern technology, we struggle to replicate the alignment accuracy achieved there. How could builders 4,500 years ago, or perhaps 12,000, measure the curvature of the earth and encode it in stone, unless they inherited that knowledge from a civilization already global in scope? When one steps back and sees the pyramids as part of a planetary grid, their longitude and latitude resonating with other sacred sites, the pattern expands. Giza aligns with Easter Island, with Machu Picchu, with Angkor, all connected along great circle lines of magnetic resonance. The geometry becomes planetary, the architecture a kind of map of consciousness itself. So maybe the hidden city beneath Giza isn't just a physical place. Maybe it's the negative space of the geometry, the unseen half of a cosmic equation. The visible pyramids are the overt expression, but the buried holes, the sealed chambers, are the echo, the silence that gives meaning to the sound. And perhaps that's the final secret of the ancient builders. They knew that true harmony requires both the seen and the unseen, the structure and the void, the number and the silence between numbers. If we ever uncover what lies beneath, it may not be a city of stone at all, but a geometry made visible, a memory of how the universe once sang through measure. There is a moment in every story when curiosity meets a wall, not of stone, but of silence. The silence that surrounds the forbidden. Around Giza, that silence takes the form of fences, permits, denials, and missing pages in official archives. The surface of the plateau has been mapped and photographed more thoroughly than almost any place on Earth. Yet what lies beneath it remains a mystery wrapped in bureaucracy. It's almost as if every time the ground threatens to reveal its secret, someone quietly covers it again. In 1978, a group of American and Egyptian researchers from the Stanford Research Institute began a project that would change how we see Giza. They brought ground-penetrating radar, seismographs, and magnetometers, the most advanced instruments available at the time, to scan beneath the Sphinx and surrounding plateau. What they found should have rewritten textbooks: networks of voids, tunnels, and chambers stretching beneath the monument. Some cavities were large enough to contain entire rooms. But when the results were presented, the Egyptian Department of Antiquities abruptly classified the data. Publicly, they were labeled inconclusive. Privately, several of the American scientists later confirmed that the readings were clear. So clear, in fact, that they had to be suppressed. It wasn't the first time this had happened. In the 1920s, French engineer Émile Barrès conducted extensive excavations around the Sphinx, funded by the Egyptian government. He claimed to have found multiple sealed passages leading beneath the structure, some descending vertically into bedrock. He mapped them meticulously, but his reports were later lost when the Antiquities Department was reorganized. Only fragments survive, sketches showing what appears to be a circular chamber beneath the monument's central axis. Barrès himself died before publishing his conclusions. By the 1990s, whispers of a forbidden dig had spread through the archaeological community. In 1996, a joint Egyptian-American team led by Zahi Hawass and John Anthony West conducted another radar survey. Hawass, then head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, initially confirmed the discovery of anomalous cavities beneath the Sphinx. But within months, he denied that any chambers existed at all. West and his geologist colleague, Dr. Robert Shaw, were barred from further participation. Hawass claimed the matter was closed. The scans, however, still circulate in unofficial archives, images of rectangular voids perfectly aligned with the Sphinx's pores. What was found there? And why did every attempt to explore it end in silence? Some suspect that the Egyptian authorities, under pressure from international academic bodies, have deliberately restricted access to protect tourism, or to protect history from revision. Others believe the motivations run deeper. If evidence were found of structures predating dynastic Egypt, it would challenge the foundation of modern civilization's narrative. It would imply that an earlier forgotten culture once mastered mathematics, astronomy, and engineering, a civilization erased by cataclysm and buried beneath millennia of denial. The 1970s were not the only time outsiders tried to look deeper. In 1987, an independent researcher named Boris Said claimed that a small group of specialists, including a young filmmaker and an Egyptian official, conducted a secret night dig near the Great Pyramid's southern base. Using portable radar, they allegedly detected a large hollow chamber, roughly 30 meters down. Said later alleged that the dig was shut down within hours by military order. Whether the story is true or not, it left behind a trace, a pattern of disappearances. Every excavation that ventures too far beneath the surface seems to vanish from public record. There's a photograph, rarely circulated, taken in 1998, showing a fenced-off square near the Sphinx enclosure, a wooden platform, floodlights and cables leading underground. The official explanation: maintenance work. Yet those who lived nearby recall trucks arriving at night, equipment being loaded in secrecy, and the site sealed by morning. A few months later, a press conference announced that no new chambers exist. The same phrase has been used for decades, as though scripted in stone. It's tempting to imagine conspiracies where there are only politics, but Giza has always been more than politics. The control of history is power. Whoever dictates the origin of civilization dictates the story of humanity itself. Egypt is not merely an archaeological site. It is a timeline, and that timeline must remain intact for the world to make sense. To admit the existence of something older, hidden or inexplicable beneath the pyramids, would be to tear a hole in that timeline, a hole wide enough for chaos to slip through. Still, fragments leak out. A declassified U.S. intelligence document from 1979 mentions subterranean anomalies near Giza consistent with man-made structures. The context is unclear, but its inclusion in a file on remote sensing applications suggests that even intelligence agencies once turned their eyes toward the plateau. The anomalies remain unexplored, officially. Local workers tell quieter stories. They speak of narrow shafts discovered during restoration projects, then immediately sealed with concrete. One man recalled hearing hollow reverberations when driving metal stakes into the ground, sounds that traveled horizontally, as if through a hidden corridor. Another swore he once descended a shaft near the Sphinx during the 1980s, only to be forced out by guards before reaching the bottom. No records confirm his claim, yet his description of the descent, smooth walls, carved steps, the echo of moving air, matches accounts written centuries ago by early explorers. Could all of this be coincidence? Perhaps, but history itself rarely behaves that way. To this day, permission to excavate beneath Giza remains one of the rarest approvals on Earth. Teams that request it are told the bedrock is too unstable, the risk to monuments too high, and yet satellite data continues to reveal what appear to be tunnels extending beyond the pyramid complex, toward areas of the desert where modern maps show nothing. In those unmarked spaces, the sand forms strange geometric ridges, too linear to be natural. No one investigates. Maybe the forbidden dig is not a single event but a pattern, an ongoing decision to preserve a secret older than Egypt itself. Maybe those who guard it do so not out of greed or fear, but reverence. If there truly is a city beneath Giza, a labyrinth or archive buried under the Sphinx, its discovery might change the world. But it might also end something, a fragile order of meaning that keeps civilization's story coherent. Because once you open a door that old, you can't close it again. Imagine for a moment the sand being swept away, revealing stairs descending into darkness, air escaping with the sigh of 10,000 years. What language would those walls speak? Would it be Egyptian? Or something older, written before words existed? Perhaps the silence surrounding the forbidden dig isn't suppression. Perhaps it's protection. Because what sleeps beneath Giza may not want to be disturbed. Not yet. The Sphinx keeps its vigil, lips cracked and unyielding, as if guarding the memory of the world's first forgetting. And the question lingers like a pulse beneath the earth. If we ever unearth the truth, will we recognize it? Or will we finally remember what we were meant to forget? The desert keeps its own kind of map, one drawn not with ink, but with wind, erosion, and the geometry of silence. Somewhere beneath those shifting contours, legends say, lies a plan, a record of what the ancients knew and what they meant to preserve. But the strangest thing about that record is that it may already exist, not as a myth, but as text, written thousands of years ago, hidden in plain sight. The priests of Egypt were not only keepers of temples, they were cartographers of eternity. And some of their oldest surviving writings describe journeys through hidden lands, beneath the earth, and beyond time, using maps that seem less geographical than metaphysical. Among these is a document known as the Book of the Hidden Chamber, or Amduat. Scholars usually interpret it as a funerary text, the guide for the sun god Ra as he travels through the 12 hours of night, facing serpents, rivers, and gates before rebirth at dawn. But when you read it without the assumption of myth, something startling happens. The gates resemble doorways, the hours align with precise intervals, and the layout of the underworld described in the text mirrors the subterranean architecture beneath Giza's plateau. Each chamber corresponds to a direction, each river to a flow of energy or water. The Amduat may not be poetry at all. It might be a coded map, a record of an actual journey through something that still exists. Other texts echo this pattern. The Book of the Two Ways, discovered in 2019 within a coffin from Deir el-Berisha, depicts the first known topographical map in human history, an intricate diagram of parallel pathways, waterways, and barriers leading to the realm of the gods. It's drawn with such mathematical precision that modern archaeologists compared it to engineering schematics. Some researchers noticed that its proportions match those of the Giza complex, scaled down and rotated slightly eastward. Could it represent the layout of an underground world, the labyrinth that Herodotus once claimed lay beneath Egypt? It's easy to dismiss such parallels as coincidence. Yet, even coincidence obeys geometry. The priests of ancient Egypt saw knowledge as cyclical, not linear. For them, time itself was a spiral, constantly returning to its origin. Maps were not meant to chart territory but consciousness, the path of initiation from the physical to the divine. But if consciousness and geography were reflections of each other, then perhaps their maps served both purposes at once, guiding souls and explorers. There's an inscription in the Temple of Edfu that describes the construction of sacred sanctuaries, according to the plan written in the earliest time. This plan, the text insists, was preserved by the builder gods, beings who came before the flood, who carved their houses into the living rock and hid the blueprints beneath the sand. The priests of later ages were said to have rediscovered these blueprints and rebuilt the temples above them. Edfu itself, they claimed, was patterned after a model buried in the west, the same direction as Giza. That story becomes stranger when compared with a much later text, the West Kar Papyrus. It tells of Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid, summoning a magician named Jedi, who knew the secret chambers of the sanctuary of Thoth. Khufu wanted to find the hidden temple where ancient writings were kept, but Jedi refused to reveal its location, saying only that it was in a chamber beneath the House of the Lion. The House of the Lion, an unmistakable reference to the Sphinx. It's the earliest written suggestion that something lies below that monument, and that even the pharaohs were forbidden to enter it. What's remarkable is how this same pattern repeats across civilizations. In Mesopotamia, there are stories of antediluvian tablets hidden by the god Enki. In India, the Vedic texts speak of cities beneath the desert, sealed by the breath of Brahma. The pattern is the same, knowledge preserved underground, accessible only to those who know how to read the maps hidden within myth. One man in the 20th century took that idea literally. In the 1930s, French mystic and linguist Schwaller de Lubitsch spent 15 years studying the Temple of Luxor. He concluded that Egyptian architecture encoded not only geometry but human anatomy, that each temple was a map of the human body, a microcosm of the cosmos. If so, then Giza might represent the body of the earth itself, and the hidden chambers beneath, its heart. Some scholars, intrigued by this concept, began comparing the pyramid layout with the proportions of the human brain. The Great Pyramid's king's chamber aligns roughly where the pineal gland would sit in that correspondence, the seat of consciousness in ancient philosophy. The smaller queen's chamber lies where the throat would be, associated with vibration and sound. The Sphinx placed before them corresponds to the mouth, the voice of the earth. This may be coincidence, or it may be evidence of a symbolic science that merged the human and the cosmic. Either way, the priest's maps may have been literal on more levels than one. Another ancient document, the Book of Caverns, goes even further. It describes 6 vast regions beneath the earth, each guarded by gatekeepers who hold keys of sound. The text repeatedly warns, those who enter without knowing the words will be devoured. For millennia, this was read as metaphor for the soul's judgment after death. But to those who look deeper, it could describe acoustic technology, resonant frequencies that open or close physical chambers. Experiments inside the Great Pyramid have shown that certain tones cause walls to vibrate, sometimes unlocking hidden seams in the stone. Could the ancients have used sound not just as ritual, but as engineering. If that is true, then perhaps the real maps of Giza are not on papyrus, but in vibration itself. Every chamber, every passage, every shaft might correspond to a frequency, and the entire plateau could be a harmonic design. The priests who guarded these secrets may not have been religious figures in the modern sense, but scientist initiates, custodians of a technology that used geometry, sound, and water to tune matter. In 2009, an archaeologist named Nicholas Reeves discovered what he described as architectural anomalies in high-resolution scans of the Valley of the Kings, patterns invisible to the eye but apparent through electromagnetic imaging. The same techniques, when applied to Giza, revealed faint outlines beneath the surface, rectangular voids arranged in a formation eerily similar to the pathways described in the Book of Two Ways. The data hinted at something larger than tombs, a plan that encompassed the entire plateau. But the most haunting question remains: who drew that plan? The pharaohs credited Thoth, the divine scribe, who measured the heavens and wrote down the architecture of time. The Greeks later called him Hermes, the messenger between worlds. His symbol was the caduceus, two serpents spiraling around a staff meeting at a winged apex. In the language of geometry, it is the same as the double helix, the pattern of DNA. The ancients may have encoded far more than we realize, not just how to build in harmony with the cosmos, but how to mirror life itself. The priests' maps, then, are not just about space, they are about creation. They chart the process by which spirit descends into matter and then rises again. The labyrinth beneath Giza may be the same, a symbolic path that leads both downward and inward, into the memory of what we are. And maybe, just maybe, the reason the priests guarded those maps so fiercely is because they didn't point to gold or treasure, but to something far more dangerous, the coordinates of consciousness itself. If we ever find that map, not on papyrus but beneath the sand, will it guide us home, or show us a world we were never meant to remember? If Egypt was not the beginning, then it must have been an inheritance. The monuments at Giza, so perfect in form, so impossible in engineering, do not feel like the work of a civilization still finding its way. They feel like memory made stone, the echo of a knowledge already ancient when the first pharaoh took the throne. To imagine that human history began here is comforting. To suspect that it did not is unsettling. But what if Egypt was merely the caretaker of something older, a remnant of a civilization erased by flood, by fire, or by deliberate silence? In the oldest Egyptian texts, there is a phrase that appears again and again, Zep Tepi, the first time. It describes an age when the gods walked the earth beside humans, when order and chaos were one, and knowledge flowed freely between heaven and the Nile. Later dynasties called it a myth, a poetic metaphor for creation. But the way it is written, with such reverence, such precision, suggests memory rather than imagination. The priests did not speak of gods as beings of faith, but as ancestors of knowledge. They were engineers of order, astronomers of divine proportion. When they vanished, humanity was left to remember them through ritual and symbol, the sacred fragments of a shattered science. What if Zep Tepi was not metaphor, but history remembered imperfectly? The Sphinx may be the key. Its weathering, as Shachin West proposed, dates it to an age of rain, perhaps 9,000 years ago when the Sahara was still green. That period aligns eerily with the end of the Younger Dryas, the geological epoch when a cataclysmic event, perhaps a comet impact or a global flood, reshaped the Earth. Ancient cultures from every corner of the world recall this same disaster. Atlantis sinking beneath the waves, the Sumerian flood of Utnapishtim, the deluge of Deucalion, the Vedic pralaya. To modern eyes, these are myths, yet the geological record whispers agreement: sudden sea level rise, extinction, climate collapse. If Egypt's oldest structures predate its own civilization, then they may belong to survivors, remnants of a culture that existed before history's restart. Imagine them arriving along the Nile after the cataclysm, carrying fragments of a lost technology, encoded not in metal or circuits, but in stone and proportion. They would have built to last, to preserve knowledge against the next forgetting. The pyramids, the Sphinx, and the alignment of Giza itself could have been their message in stone. A star map, a harmonic code, a monument to what once was. Mainstream archaeology rejects this idea, insisting that civilization arose independently around 3000 BCE. But the evidence of older knowledge persists like a shadow refusing to fade. The Sumerians, who emerged suddenly with writing, law, and astronomy, claimed they inherited their wisdom from beings called the Anunnaki. The Egyptians spoke of Thoth and Osiris, teachers who came from the west after a great flood. In Mesoamerica, the Maya remembered Quetzalcoatl, a white-bearded sage who arrived across the sea to rebuild after destruction. Always, the story is the same. Civilization did not begin, it resumed. Archaeologist Graham Hancock once called this the fingerprint of the gods. His phrase was mocked, but the fingerprints remain. Across continents, the oldest monuments share impossible precision. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, 16,000 feet above sea level, blocks of andesite weighing hundreds of tons were cut with angles as perfect as those at Giza. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, dated to 11,600 years ago, rises from the earth with pillars carved in bas relief, aligned to celestial north. It predates agriculture, writing, and cities by thousands of years, yet its sophistication rivals that of Egypt's temples. And at the same moment in time, sea levels rose catastrophically, drowning coastal plains that may once have held the true hearts of those early cultures. Is it possible that these were all outposts of one civilization, a global culture erased by the flood, surviving only in memory? If so, Egypt would have been its final sanctuary, the last place where the survivors could rebuild before the sands closed over the world's first age. That would explain why the earliest dynasties began suddenly, with no period of primitive development. It would also explain the obsession with resurrection, rebirth, and eternal return, echoes of a people who had already witnessed the death of their world. The priests of the later centuries must have known fragments of this truth. Their myths of gods emerging from the floodwaters, of islands of flame, of hidden records, are all veiled descriptions of survival. When they wrote of Thoth guiding humanity after the deluge, they may have been remembering real figures, teachers who preserved fragments of lost knowledge through symbols and geometry. Over time, those teachers became gods, and science became myth. The possibility of a shadow civilization is more than speculation. Beneath the sands of the Sahara, satellite imaging has revealed buried river systems, vast, dried arteries that once connected regions now inhospitable. Along their paths lie unexcavated mounds and ruins visible only from the air. Some form geometric alignments, others appear as massive circular depressions. Archaeologists have barely touched them. The official explanation, natural formations. But nature rarely builds in straight lines. If these ruins are confirmed, they could belong to an epoch before dynastic Egypt, a proto-culture that mastered hydraulic engineering, astronomy, and acoustics. Such a civilization might have understood the earth not as a resource, but as an instrument, a living system tuned through architecture. The pyramids, then, would not have been memorials to death, but devices to sustain balance, to ensure that the Earth's resonance remained stable after the trauma of the cataclysm. Perhaps this is why later powers feared what might lie beneath Giza. If proof of such an ancient civilization were ever unearthed, it would unravel the narrative of linear progress. It would mean that humanity's story is not one of ascent from ignorance, but of return from amnesia. Even the ancients seemed haunted by this memory. The Egyptians believed that history repeats in cycles, that after every golden age comes decline, followed by renewal. Their entire religion centered on rebirth, the sun dying and rising, the Nile flooding and receding, Osiris slain and resurrected. It was more than theology, it was warning. And maybe, buried deep under the plateau, the evidence still waits. Fossilized machinery of a forgotten age, inscriptions written in a script we no longer have the frequency to hear. Or perhaps it's subtler still. Geometric resonance encoded into the stones themselves, a language that only vibration can translate. We dig for artifacts, but perhaps what we're meant to uncover is recognition, the understanding that we've been here before, that civilization has risen and fallen like the tide, and that each era begins by burying the last. Under the eternal gaze of the Sphinx, that truth seems to linger. It waits in the stillness, in the hum beneath the ground, in the alignment of stone and star that refuses to fade. Maybe that's why we keep searching, because some part of us remembers the world before the flood, remembers the sound of a civilization so old it became myth. And if we ever find it again, if the shadow civilization steps once more into the light, will we see it as our past, or as our future returning to claim us? There is a moment, inside the Great Pyramid, when silence becomes sound. The air feels dense, almost electric, and even a breath seems to echo against the granite walls. Many who have stood there, archaeologists, musicians, scientists, describe the same sensation. A pressure behind the ears, a faint vibration in the bones, as if the stone itself were humming. It is not imagination. Measurements show that certain frequencies resonate within the chambers, amplifying sound in ways that defy ordinary acoustics. The Great Pyramid is, quite literally, an instrument, and if it was meant to play, then somewhere beneath the plateau lies the rest of the orchestra. The first to notice this were the explorers of the 19th century. When the British engineer John Greaves entered the pyramid in 1638, he remarked that even footsteps created a music of infinite echo. Later, in the 1920s, the Egyptologist Ahmed Fakhri observed how chanting inside the ground gallery produced a vibrational feedback that intensified the longer one continued. Modern scientists have confirmed what the ancients may have always known. A structure's geometry causes sound waves to reinforce themselves. Frequencies between 90 and 120 Hz linger in the chamber far longer than expected, creating what physicists call a standing wave. It is the auditory equivalent of light reflecting endlessly between mirrors. But why would anyone design such a phenomenon 5,000 years ago? Unless, of course, sound was part of its purpose. Ancient Egyptian texts speak often of the word of creation, the divine utterance that brought the universe into being. The Memphite theology, carved on the Shabarka stone, tells how the god Ptah conceived the world in his heart and spoke it into existence. To the Egyptians, sound was not metaphor, it was matter. Vibration shaped form. The priests of Heliopolis believed that the sacred chants, the Heka, could command reality itself. And in temple rituals, every intonation was tuned according to measured intervals. Music, language, and architecture were expressions of the same law, resonance. When researchers played harmonic tones inside the king's chamber, something strange happened. The air pressure fluctuated rhythmically, and nearby instruments registered low-frequency electromagnetic fields. It was as if the granite, rich in quartz and feldspar, responded to sound by releasing energy. This phenomenon, called the piezoelectric effect, is well known today. Quartz crystals generate electricity when compressed or vibrated. The ancients, without the word for it, may have discovered it empirically. They may have built the pyramid to resonate with the Earth's own frequencies, a tuning fork between heaven and ground. Further below, the so-called subterranean chamber, rough and unfinished, behaves differently. When struck or shouted into, It produces a deep, bass-like echo that lasts several seconds. Some researchers think it was designed to collect or dampen low vibrations, perhaps even to balance the harmonic field of the structure above. The entire pyramid, then, might function as a layered sound device, drawing resonance upward through its geometry. There is precedent for this idea. At the Serapeum of Saqqara, massive granite boxes, weighing up to 80 tons each, were carved so precisely that modern engineers struggle to explain their finish. When sound waves are generated near them, the boxes vibrate sympathetically as though designed to resonate. The ancient Egyptians called these containers sarcophagi, yet no human remains have ever been found inside. What if they weren't coffins, but resonators, devices meant to hold not bodies but frequencies? Sound leaves no visible trace, yet it endures. The vibrations of the past still echo faintly through the ground, measurable by instruments more sensitive than ears. Some geophysicists studying the plateau have recorded infrasound, frequencies below human hearing, emanating from the bedrock. The sources are unknown. They rise and fall with lunar cycles as though the Earth itself is breathing. The pyramids stand precisely over these sonic hotspots, amplifying them like microphones pressed against the planet's pulse. In myth, the Egyptians spoke of the living stones, sacred blocks that could sing. They were said to awaken during solstices, vibrating with the song of the sun. At first glance, it sounds like legend, but then one learns of the Colossi of Memnon, statues near Thebes that emitted musical tones each dawn after being cracked by an earthquake. Ancient travelers described the sound as the voice of a god greeting the day. It was later discovered that the heat of the rising sun caused trapped air within the stone to expand, producing vibration. Even in ruin, the ancients had designed resonance. If sound truly played such a role in their understanding of divinity, perhaps it also served a practical purpose. Modern engineers have suggested that low-frequency resonance could have been used to levitate or reduce friction in moving heavy stones, not through magic, but through physics. Certain frequencies cause granular materials to behave as if weightless. Sand itself can be made to ripple and rise under vibration. Legends from Tibet and Arabia tell of monks lifting stones with chanting, stories dismissed as myth until experiments in the 20th century reproduced similar effects. The builders of Giza may have known that sound could move matter as surely as the wind shapes dunes. This would explain the otherwise impossible logistics of their construction. It would also explain why every significant monument in Egypt, from Dendera to Karnak, is acoustically tuned. Each has a sweet spot where sound amplifies and harmonizes. The ancients built temples like instruments, designed not only to be seen but to be heard. Some researchers believe this acoustic knowledge extended underground. Cavities beneath the plateau may act as resonant chambers, amplifying subterranean frequencies. The rumored tunnels connecting the pyramids could have carried sound or water, or both. When water flows through rock, it produces vibration. When vibration passes through chambers, it creates tone. The entire landscape could have functioned as a symphonic machine, balancing the energies of earth and sky. If so, then perhaps what lies beneath Giza is not merely a city, but a resonant archive, a library of stone frequencies waiting to be reawakened. The hall of records may not hold scrolls but harmonics, knowledge encoded not in language but in vibration. A sound could be a sentence, a frequency, an equation. To read such a library would require listening, not looking. At night, when wind sweeps through the plateau, some claim to hear faint music, tones too steady to be random, carried through the desert air. Scientists call it Aeolian resonance, the sound of wind passing over openings and cavities. But locals call it something older, the song of the sleeping gods. They say it is the echo of a forgotten civilization still humming beneath the earth, waiting for the right vibration to wake it. If there is truth in that story, it might mean that every stone in Giza is alive. Each block a note, each chamber a chord, and the desert itself a symphony that never ended, only grew too quiet for us to hear. Perhaps that's why the pyramids in Giza, they were never meant to speak in words but in frequencies, the universal language that neither time nor translation can destroy. And in that silence between tones, where history fades into vibration, the ancients may still be whispering. If one day we learn to listen again, what might those echoes reveal? Not about the past, but about what it means to be human. Every age inherits its secrets from the one before it, but only a few dare to guard them openly. Egypt, it seems, has always been a place where knowledge walks hand in hand with silence. Yet the silence that covers Giza is not ancient. It is modern. The true veil that hides the lost city beneath the pyramids was not woven by time, but by empire, by the machinery of scholarship and politics that decides which fragments of truth are permitted to surface and which must be buried again. When Napoleon's armies marched into Egypt in 1798, they brought not only soldiers but surveyors, linguists, and engineers. The French expedition's description de l'Egypte mapped the monuments with obsessive precision, but it also marked the beginning of control. The European powers realized that whoever owned Egypt's past would also own its future. Archaeology became not just science but territory. Every discovery passed through colonial hands. Every artifact left the desert in crates bound for London, Paris, or Berlin. What began as curiosity became possession, and so the first layer of the modern veil was drawn. By the time the 20th century dawned, archaeology had become an institution, one with its own hierarchies, funding, and loyalties. Egyptology, once a search for wonder, turned into a bureaucracy of permission slips. The Supreme Council of Antiquities, under the shifting regimes of Egypt's government, became gatekeeper of both access and narrative. Foreign researchers had to agree, explicitly or implicitly, that their findings would not contradict official timelines. Those who did were marginalized. Those who questioned too loudly were denied permits. It is not a conspiracy of villains, but of convenience. The story must remain simple, elegant, and safe for tourism. But truth is rarely elegant. In 1947, a report by the Egyptian Geological Survey quietly mentioned artificial voids beneath Giza, identified through seismic anomalies. No follow-up was ever published. During the Cold War, rumors persisted that both the United States and the Soviet Union had conducted their own geophysical studies under the guise of cultural exchanges. The results, if they exist, remain classified. In the 1980s, satellite imagery taken by the American Landsat program detected rectangular patterns beneath the sand, possible ruins or roads extending miles beyond the known necropolis. The data was quietly archived. When independent researchers requested access, they were told the images had been misinterpreted. It is easy to blame governments, but the veil is thicker than politics. It stretches through academia itself. Universities rely on funding. Funding relies on credibility, and credibility relies on conformity. To suggest that Egypt's monuments might predate civilization, or that they encode advanced knowledge, is to risk ridicule and exile from the scholarly community. Careers are not destroyed by proof, but by deviation. So the safest course is silence. Professors teach what has already been approved. Museums display what has already been explained. Everything else remains speculative, that polite word which buries anomalies under a different kind of sand. Yet beneath that silence, another archaeology persists, a quiet network of researchers, engineers, linguists, and mystics who continue to ask the forbidden questions. They work without grants, often without recognition, but their findings surface in whispers. A retired radar technician who once scanned near the Sphinx claims his instruments detected a hollow 20 meters deep, perfectly rectangular. A former museum employee recalls crates of unidentified fragments, labeled only non-catalogued, stone type unknown. And every few years, a satellite image appears online, showing faint outlines in the desert that vanish from databases days later. These fragments may prove nothing, but together they form a pattern, the shape of an unspoken truth. Perhaps that is why the veil remains, not because the powers of the world fear discovery, but because they fear confusion. If the official history were to fracture, if humanity were forced to accept that its origins are older, stranger, and more cyclical than we imagine, then what would happen to all our certainties? Every empire, after all, builds its identity on a story of progress. To admit that we are not the first would be to surrender the illusion that we will be the last. And so, the silence continues. In 2017, Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities announced a remarkable discovery. Cosmic ray scans had revealed a large void within the Great Pyramid. It was the first major internal anomaly found in modern times. An empty space above the Graham Gallery, 30 meters long, perfectly aligned with the pyramid's axis. The global media hailed it as revolutionary, but within weeks, the excitement faded. Officials insisted the void was structural, a byproduct of construction. No excavation was planned. The chamber, visible only through radiation data, was left unopened. There is nothing there, they said. Yet the scans are clear. Something exists, precisely where none should. Such moments reveal the machinery of the veil at work. Openness followed by retreat. Discovery followed by denial. Perhaps this is necessary. Perhaps there are truths so destabilizing that institutions cannot absorb them without collapsing. But one wonders, who decides what humanity is ready to know? The priests of the past, or the bureaucrats of the present? In either case, the result is the same. The threshold remains closed. Still, history resists control. The sand erases, but it also reveals. Every few decades, a storm exposes something new. A statue, a foundation, a forgotten temple. In 2011, just before political unrest swept Cairo, infrared imaging revealed 17 buried pyramids across Egypt, previously unknown. 17. The data was confirmed by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, then quietly withdrawn from public release. One wonders how many more lie hidden, their coordinates erased not by time, but by policy. Perhaps the real labyrinth of Egypt is not underground at all, but administrative, a maze of ministries, permissions, and politics designed to keep the curious walking in circles. Each generation of seekers believes it stands on the brink of revelation, yet somehow the entrance remains sealed. The desert teaches patience, bureaucracy teaches endurance. Both achieve the same result: preservation through delay. It's easy to feel anger at such concealment, but maybe the ancients understood the necessity of veils. A temple of Isis bore an inscription that read, "I am all that has been, and is, and shall be. No mortal has ever lifted my veil." Perhaps secrecy is not suppression, but protection. A way of ensuring that truth is discovered, not given. For what is freely handed loses its sacredness. What is earned transforms the one who finds it. And so the pyramids wait, silent and patient, as they have for millennia. Scholars argue, tourists marvel, governments guard, but the stone does not move. Somewhere below, the lost city breathes in darkness, its chambers untouched, its knowledge uncorrupted. The empire above changes names and faces, but the veil remains. Perhaps the ancients designed it that way, not to hide knowledge forever, but to test the persistence of those who seek it. If some doors are not meant to be forced, they open only to those who remember why they were built in the first place. Until then, the empire guards its silence, and the desert guards the empire. There is something alive in the desert, something that breathes very slowly. Each gust of wind that sweeps across the Giza plateau feels like an exhale, each shifting dune like the movement of a chest rising and falling in sleep. To stand there at dawn, when the horizon glows faintly before the sun climbs, is to feel that the sand itself is dreaming. It dreams of water, of jungles that once covered this land, of cities whose rooftops now lie buried under centuries of silence. Sometimes, when the air is still, you can almost sense it turning in its sleep, as if the desert were preparing to wake. In 2011, a team of researchers using infrared satellite imaging discovered faint geometric traces beneath the sands, shapes too ordered to be natural. 17 potential pyramids, more than 1,000 tombs, and thousands of forgotten settlements. The data was published briefly, then withdrawn. Official explanations cited errors in interpretation, yet the images remain archived across scattered university servers. Among those patterns were outlines that seemed to form roads, straight lines running from the edge of the Nile toward Giza, intersecting at right angles, then fading beneath dunes like veins under skin. The desert, once thought barren, appeared to be mapped by something deliberate. Could it be that beneath our feet lies not one buried monument, but an entire city, the mirror of Giza above? Geologists say that sand is never truly still. It moves in waves, inch by inch, following rhythms older than history. What lies buried can return. Many of Egypt's discoveries have happened this way. A storm reveals a temple, the wind unearths a fragment of carved stone. The desert forgets its promise of silence for a single moment. The plateau of Saqqara, too, once lay invisible beneath sand until 1850, when a gust uncovered a limestone edge. Beneath it, an entire necropolis slept, corridors, sarcophagi, painted walls. What then waits beneath Giza's dunes, where radar and rumor insist chambers still hum below? Perhaps what we call the awakening of the desert is not the land changing, but the past remembering itself. Every civilization that has risen from this soil has been drawn to the same places. They build, they bury, they build again. The ancient Egyptians constructed their temples upon earlier ruins. The Greeks built their shrines upon the Egyptian foundations. Each layer mimics the last, as if guided by an invisible pattern, a memory of geometry buried in the earth. Archaeologists have found pre-dynastic tombs directly beneath later ones, their alignments uncannily similar. It is as if the desert whispers its blueprints to those who listen closely enough. Sometimes, the whispers become visible. After sandstorms in 2020, archaeologists discovered fragments of ancient masonry emerging near Abu Rawash, just north of Giza, a supposed site of Djedefre's pyramid. The area had long been considered unremarkable, yet the new formations hinted at something more extensive. The angles matched Giza's grid, and the erosion patterns suggested that they were once part of a larger complex. Locals spoke of nights when faint metallic sounds came from beneath the dunes, as if something beneath was shifting. The sands of Egypt, it seems, never forget. They merely hide. Scientists studying the plateau's microclimate have discovered that temperature variations between day and night can cause subtle movements within the dunes, a kind of breathing. Over centuries, this respiration can slowly reveal what was hidden. Some believe the Great Sphinx itself might have re-emerged in such a way. When Thutmose IV uncovered it after a dream, its head and shoulders protruded above the sand, the rest of its body still buried. An inscription between its paws, the dream stele, records that the Sphinx spoke to him in his sleep, promising power if he freed it from the earth. It's an allegory perhaps, but one that feels prophetic. For every age seems to receive the same calling, to remember what the sand has hidden. Today, modern instruments read the desert in frequencies rather than symbols. Satellites scan its heat signatures, and each pixel becomes a whisper from below. Some anomalies beneath Giza suggest rectangular foundations far larger than any known temple. Others trace long corridors running east to west, as if linking the three great pyramids through a subterranean artery. The ground, measured through gravimetric data, pulses faintly, not enough to be seismic, but too rhythmic to be random. It's as though the plateau itself has a heartbeat. The ancients would have recognized this as sacred. They spoke of Bar and Kar, the twin essences of life, spirit and energy that animated both people and places. To them, the desert was not empty but sleeping. The pyramids were its hearts, beating beneath the sun. When the Kar of a place awakened, they said, it could speak. Perhaps this is why the Sphinx faces the rising sun, to listen for the first breath of each new day, waiting for the desert to speak again. And maybe that awakening has already begun. Climate shifts and urban expansion have exposed areas of the plateau untouched for centuries. In 2024, an Egyptian-Italian team discovered traces of a vast stone platform beneath layers of sediment south of the Great Pyramid, perfectly level, yet extending under the sand farther than they could measure. The platform's composition differed from any known quarry in the region. The discovery was quietly archived as structural base work. But some believe it could be the roof of an enormous subterranean complex. If so, it would mean that the monuments we see are only the visible tips of something vast beneath. In mythology, every awakening comes with a price. To wake the gods is to remember what they protected us from. The ancients believed that knowledge and chaos were twins. One could not rise without the other. Perhaps that's why Giza remains half-buried, its low half sealed beneath the desert's shifting skin. The sand is not an obstacle but a guardian, a veil keeping the balance between what we seek and what we are not yet ready to find. Still, the world is changing. Technology digs deeper each year. Satellites can now pair meters below the surface. Radar can map voids invisible to the eye. The sands grow thinner, the silence shorter. Whether by curiosity or inevitability, something will soon be uncovered that cannot be reburied. Imagine that moment. A dawn when the first light touches a newly exposed stairway, a door of stone glinting beneath the sand. The air will feel charged, as if the desert itself were drawing its first conscious breath in 10,000 years. And perhaps, just before the diggers arrive, the wind will carry a low hum, the sound of the ancient plateau awakening, the memory of water and temples stirring in its sleep. If the lost city beneath Giza truly exists, then its reappearance will not just be an archaeological event. It will be a return, a reunion between the world that forgot and the world that remembers. The sand will fall away like eyelids opening, and beneath it, the earth will see itself again. But as every dawn brings both light and shadow, one must ask, when the desert finally wakes, will we? Or will we be the next dream it buries? Every civilization leaves behind its ruins. But Giza does not feel like ruin. It feels like memory, a thought made solid, a message too immense to be forgotten. When you stand before the Great Pyramid at night, there's a weight that isn't just gravity. It's the gravity of remembering. The air hums as if it carries the echo of a language older than speech. You can sense it even in the silence, the suggestion that these stones are not dead but dreaming, and what they dream of might not be the past but us. If the legends are true, there is a city beneath these monuments, not a city of streets and markets, but of thought and resonance, built by those who understood that time itself can be carved into stone. For centuries, explorers have sought its entrance, the sealed chamber beneath the Sphinx, the hollow beneath the Great Pyramid, the tunnels whispered of in secret maps. Perhaps none have entered because the city isn't meant to be found by shovels or machines. Perhaps its true corridors lie beneath our perception, a memory field imprinted into the rock, waiting for a consciousness able to remember it. The ancient Egyptians never saw memory as intangible. To them, remembering was an act of resurrection. The word they used for memory, sia, meant perception itself, To remember was to bring something into being, and their temples, their geometry, their rituals, all were designed to awaken remembrance. The pyramid was not built to preserve the dead, but to preserve awareness. Its proportions, perfectly harmonized with the earth, may have been designed to store information in vibration, just as crystals store energy. The Great Pyramid could be, in this sense, a planetary archive, a resonant hard drive of the human story. It is not such a strange idea. Modern science knows that certain materials can record vibrations indefinitely. Crystals, metals, even water retain acoustic memory. Every sound that ever touched the stones of Giza may still exist within them, layered like music on an internal record. The walls remember the voices of their builders, the wind of lost centuries, the prayers of those who stood beneath their shadow. If consciousness interacts with matter, as quantum theory suggests, then those vibrations are not inert, they are data. The pyramid could literally be remembering itself. And if so, what happens when we listen? Recent experiments using electromagnetic resonance have revealed that the King's Chamber amplifies frequencies of 16, 30, and 90 Hz, tones that correspond to the brain's alpha and theta states, associated with meditation and dreaming. To stand in that chamber is to enter the threshold between waking and memory. Some researchers believe this was intentional, that the chamber was built as an interface between human consciousness and the memory of the earth itself. It was never a tomb, but a transmitter, allowing the initiate to access what the ancients called the records of the first time. What if that's what the whole of records truly means? Not the library beneath the sand, but a frequency beneath the mind. An archive encoded in the resonance of the planet, accessible through geometry and sound. The Sphinx, with its weathered body and enigmatic gaze, could be the guardian of this frequency, the mouth through which the earth speaks. To open its hidden chamber might not require digging, but tuning, finding the precise vibration that unlocks the memory within the stone. Such an idea blurs the line between myth and physics, yet the ancients rarely separated the two. Their science was spiritual because their spirituality was scientific. The gods they worshipped were not beings in the modern sense, but principles, the laws of nature personified. Thoth was not merely a deity of writing, he was the embodiment of cosmic intelligence, the principle that thought creates reality. To seek the records of Thoth is to seek the origin of consciousness itself. And where else would such records be kept, if not in the earth that remembers all it has witnessed? Imagine that buried city not as walls and columns, but as a labyrinth of frequency, chambers of harmonic resonance, built to store not objects but awareness. Each chamber attuned to a specific vibration, corresponding to a stage of knowledge. The initiate descending through them would not be walking downward, but inward into deeper states of memory. At the center, perhaps, a perfect void, the still point where vibration becomes silence, where time ceases and consciousness remembers itself as the source. That silence might be the true treasure of Giza, the moment when humanity realizes it has always been the architect of its own myth. It's tempting to believe the pyramids were built by hands, but perhaps they were shaped by intention. Modern experiments show that thought can influence matter at quantum scales. If a civilization existed that understood this principle completely, they might have built not with tools but with resonance, focusing sound and mind together to align atoms in perfect geometry. The resulting structure would not merely stand against time, it would exist outside it, forever resonating with the frequency of its creation. Some physicists have noted that the pyramid's dimensions correspond to harmonic ratios found in planetary orbits, as if the builders understood celestial mechanics as music. The Earth, Moon, and Sun are locked in rhythms, just as notes are locked in scales. The pyramid may have been built to harmonize with those rhythms, acting as a stabilizing node in the symphony of the solar system. In that sense, it's not just an archive, but a participant, a living instrument in the song of the cosmos. When we look at it now, eroded, fractured, surrounded by the noise of modern life, it's easy to forget that. Yet, beneath that erosion, the geometry endures, the angles still hold, the stones still sing, and the desert still hums faintly beneath them. The earth remembers. Perhaps that's why so many who visit Giza describe a feeling that lingers long after they leave, a sense that they've glimpsed something vast and wordless. The pyramid does not answer questions, it replaces them with remembrance. It reminds us that we too are built of the same materials: minerals, water, resonance, memory. The lost city beneath may not be a place we must uncover, but a state we must recover. Because if the earth holds the memory of all that has been, then so do we. The pyramids are mirrors, showing us the architecture of our own forgotten origin. They don't point to the past, they point inward. And maybe, when the last grain of sand falls and the final chamber's opened, we won't find an ancient city at all, but something far more familiar. The memory of ourselves, waiting patiently beneath the pyramid, whispering the same question that began this journey. Do you remember?